personal observations into the general elections in Turkey. You're very welcome to take those of you who come in person as well as those who are joining us online. In such numbers. Up here on the podium, we have to hear a delegation from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and from the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. We'll begin with some brief statements from the podium, and there should then be plenty of time for your questions. I first give the floor to Michael Georg-Link, who is Special Coordinator and leader of the short-term OSCE Observer Mission. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Katja. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you very much for joining our press conference. We do it together here, and we will have a couple of remarks, as Katja said, by all of us. And let me begin by thanking you for all this press conference, not only joining it, but also following the whole development and, of course, following these two important elections which we witnessed yesterday. It is always for us an honor to be here in this wonderful and hospitable country where we are not observing elections for the first time, but therefore, because it's so tragic, please allow me to start by expressing our condolences on the tragic loss of life, where so many lives have been lost, that occurred following the earthquakes earlier this year. This certainly makes this observation a special one. We are here in full conscience of the losses the Turkish people had suffered, and that this is not an easy situation. All of us observers were so impressed by the overwhelming turnout in these elections. In this centenary year of the Turkish Republic, the Turkish people have clearly demonstrated their commitment and their willingness to having the decisive say in the future of this country. Now let me come to the conclusions, to the main conclusions, which we will share with you today. A more complete statement, as you know, will be available and published immediately after our statements. And therefore, let me summarize from my view the most important points. In the general elections held in the wake of the devastating earthquakes, voters had a choice between genuine political alternatives, and voter participation was high. But the incumbent and the ruling parties enjoyed an unjustified advantage, including through biased media coverage. So there were genuine political alternatives, but limited by an unlevel playing field. In addition to this, the continued restrictions on fundamental freedoms of assembly, association and expression hindered the participation of some opposition politicians and parties, civil society and independent media in the election process. Nonetheless, we found that the campaign itself was competitive and largely free for most contestants, but was characterized by intense polarization and marred by harsh rhetoric, instances of misuse of administrative resources, and the pressure and intimidation faced by especially one opposition party. The election administration technically managed the elections efficiently, but there was a lack of transparency and communication, as well as concern over its independence. Measures designed to facilitate registration and voting for earthquake-affected citizens were limited, placing an additional burden on these voters to exercise their voting rights. Election day was generally well organized and assessed positively by our observers. However, instances of deficient implementation of certain procedures, particularly during voting and counting, were noted. That's the overall picture, but I want to particularly highlight a few background topics that brought us to these conclusions. It's important that, and an important background information, that in practice, freedom of assembly, association and expression are restricted by legislation, and that the independence of the judiciary remains a concern. While we note positively that the long-standing recommendation to lower the parliamentary threshold was addressed, many other important recommendations remain unaddressed. Turning to the political scene, Yes, the technical registration of candidates, the technical registration was managed inclusively, but still party dissolution proceedings against the second largest opposition party impeded its participation, and the criminal prosecution of some prominent opposition politicians may also have hindered their candidacy. Such sort of politically motivated interference in the electoral process is not in line with international commitments made by Turkey, for example, in the OSCE or under the European Convention of Human Rights. This applied also to some very prominent individuals, including the mayor of Istanbul, Mr. Imamoglu, and former HDP co-chair Demirtas. All in all, let me sum up that in a spirit of friendship and deep affection to the Turkish people and to this country, we were observing and we were trying to do to the best of our abilities our observation. In summing up, let me say these were competitive but still limited elections, as the criminalization of some political forces, including the detention of several opposition politicians, prevented full political pluralism and impeded some individuals' rights to run in elections. That is why we said political interference in the electoral process is not in line with Turkey's international commitments, and that is what we measure, whether commitments are being respected and the law is being respected. For the preliminary results we have seen, this election is not over. We will continue to observe also the second round of the presidential election and look forward to releasing further conclusions at that time. Thank you very much. And back over to Katja.
Thank you very much. We now move on to Frank Schwabe, who heads the delegation from PACE.
Thank you very much, Igulea. Good afternoon. So I refer to the text as well, but in addition, I would like to say that we were here as a Council of Europe with 39 members for the short-term election observation. I would like to thank the OSCE ODIHR for the very good cooperation, because at the end we are in a way depending on the professionality of this organization. So I have to inform you that we were invited by the authorities of this country due to the situation that Turkey is under monitoring in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. We are prepared for sure as well for a possible second round, but we were here already for a pre-electoral mission, 2 days, and we had the opportunity to had a lot of interlocutors from all over the society, the governmental parties, the opposition parties, civil societies, and so on and so on. And we had the opportunity to meet the Central Electoral Council, what unfortunately was this time not possible. So the country have a lot of democratic challenges for sure, and we have a lot of statements in our organization, the Council of Europe, referring to this. But nevertheless, I have to say as well, like Mr. Link, that we were impressed by the high turnout in this election and by the possibility, even when it's problematic, to run and to have an election campaign for some parties and some politicians, that there was the possibility of a competition. You could feel it at the election day that the Turkish democracy is breathing. So I would say the Turkish democracy is proving to be amazingly resilient. This shows the high turnout in the election, but Turkey does not fulfill the basic principles of a democratic election for sure as well. Central political and social actors are in prison. Against judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, media freedom is severely restricted, and there's a climate of self-censorship. So Turkey has a long way from fair election campaign conditions. And I really would like to underline this, because some people say, what has it to do with the elections and with the election campaign and our observation? We have judgments from the, I would call it, highest court in Europe, the European Court of Human Rights. And I'm really here to call the authorities in the country, which one ever we will see, to release those one who are in prison and where is a very clear judgment from the European Court of Human Rights. And the most important and prominent examples are Osman Kavala and Selahattin Demirtas, because this has to do something with the democratic constitution and the situation in the country. I have also to remind the Turkish government on the recommendations of the Venice Commission and Greco and other bodies of the Council of Europe. We spoke already about the question of media freedom. I always used, when I go to election campaign, to switch on the TV, even if I don't understand the language, but I get an impression. And when I switch on TRT Harbor, maybe you are here, I have really an impression that the current president was very much seen in TV, and we had a lot of talks together with RTÜK, the Radio and Television High Council, in the pre-electoral mission, now in the mission. And till today, I don't really understand the rules very much. And for sure, it brings a kind of situation of self-censorship into the country, and this has to concern out. Again, there was a really high turnout and a generally free access for voters to go to the polling stations yesterday, although there were some situations. I faced one myself, what was not very easy because people were very nervous. This was my assessment, but anyhow, it was possible to vote. We have restrictions for sure, very much for the HDP and for some politicians. We have to mention it, and we mention it in several reports of the Council of Europe. What was a matter of concern was really the situation yesterday evening and in the night, where it was not really clear how the situation was going on and what was really happening. I think is more clear today. And really this, I have to ask the Supreme Electoral Council, who have a very special mandate in this country, to be as much as transparent as possible, because I think with much more transparency, it would be able to prevent such a situation. Again, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having us here in this situation. We try to do our job, our mandate, impartial as possible, and thank you very much for the good cooperation here.
Many thanks. We now move on to Farah Karimi, who heads the delegation from the OSCE PA.
Thank you, Katja, and thank you all for joining us, especially after a long election day and night. So I want to express my deep appreciation to my colleagues, Special Coordinator Michael Link, Head of PACE Delegation Frank Schwabe, and and also Ambassador Jan Peterson for their excellent cooperation throughout our election observation mission. My name is Farah Karimi, and I am a senator in the Dutch Senate and a member of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. It was an honor for me to head a team of 98 OSCE Parliamentary Assembly observers from 26 different countries who came together to observe the elections in your beautiful country. I want to highlight that our teams were warmly welcomed across the country, not just in Ankara, but also in regions like Istanbul, Izmir, Van, and Diyarbakir. And personally, I had the privilege of observing the process in Cankaya and Elmadag. And I extend my sincere gratitude to everyone for their warm hospitality. Unfortunately, I must address the regrettable decision by the Turkish government to deny accreditations to 2 parliamentarians from Sweden and Denmark. While we respect a country's right to control access to polling stations, it is important that the invitation to our assembly to observe elections does not influence the composition of the observation missions. This decision, based on the parliamentarians' public opinion, is particularly disheartening. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to echo the statements made by my colleagues, Mr. Link and Mr. Schwabe, in emphasizing that despite the availability of political alternatives for Turkish people, these elections have seen unfair advantages enjoyed by the incumbent president and ruling parties. We are yet to know the final results, but in the event of a second presidential round, we will pay close attention to ensuring a level playing field in our observations. Throughout our mission, we closely monitored every step of the election day process, from the opening of polling stations to the voting and counting. The polling stations we visited had a remarkable voter turnout, showing the strong democratic spirit of the Turkish people. I commend the dedication of everyone involved, including poll workers and civil society. It is crucial to address the significant underrepresentation of women in Turkish politics. I urge the next government, parliament, and political parties to take concrete actions to ensure equal participation of women in the country's political life. This can include introducing laws that guarantee an equal number of male and female candidates on electoral lists. I also want to express my appreciation for the determination shown by those who, despite the challenges caused by recent earthquakes, made the effort to travel to their damaged homes and vote. However, it's concerning that the voter turnout in earthquake-affected areas was lower, indicating that many people couldn't vote. In case of a second round of the presidential election, we hope concrete measures will be taken to ensure everyone can exercise their right to vote. The government should also take additional steps to support individuals facing difficulties during such critical circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention, and of course, I am ready to answer any question you may have.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, from the podium, we turn to Ambassador Jan Petersen, who heads the mission of the International Observer Mission from ODIHR's side.
Thank you very much, and I join my colleagues in welcome you, all of you, and thank you for your interest in our work. First of all, I would like to begin by thanking the Turkish authorities for inviting us to observe. And I'd also like to thank our partners in the International Election Observation Mission from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, as well as the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, for their excellent cooperation, and especially our coordinator, Mr. Link. Before I go into our findings in more detail, I'd like to emphasize the fact that I and a team of election experts have been in Turkey since late March, with 28 long-term observers arriving just a week later to observe around the country. In this period of 6 weeks, we have therefore had the opportunity to observe the run-up to the elections closely and to hold numerous meetings with officials as well as representatives of the election authorities, political parties, civil society, and the media. Further, 213 short-term observers joined us last week, enabling us to make a comprehensive statistical assessment of the voting process on the election day. Allow me then to go into a few key points in more detail. First of all, I would like to congratulate the people of Turkey for their democratic spirit, which was illustrated by the high turnout on election day. Voters had a choice to make between genuine political alternatives, and the campaign period was mostly peaceful, with most candidates campaigning freely. At the same time, the election administration, led by the Supreme Election Council, worked efficiently and mostly within the set legal deadlines. This was no small feat, given the challenges of the devastating earthquakes that shook this country just a few months ago. These are all positive elements in the process running up to yesterday's election, and I'm glad to be able to draw your attention to them here today. However, there are other elements of our assessment that are regrettably more negative. I just mentioned the election administration. Notwithstanding its efficiency, its work was marked by a lack of transparency, inadequate communication, and concern over independence. Not only were sessions of the Supreme Election Commission and Mid-Level Election Council not held in public, but the Supreme Election Council also failed to publish most of its decisions despite the legal obligation to do so. Another area of concern was the pressure on opposition politicians and parties, which was a serious obstacle to their participation in the election. The Green Left Party faced widespread intimidation and even arrest of its supporters, which goes against international standards and severely obstructed the party's campaign opportunities. Long-standing concerns about the respect for fundamental freedoms of the assembly, association, and expression, which are all key to democracy, were not dealt with during the election period. And also the Constitution guarantees the independence of the judiciary. Many of the people to whom we spoke from across a wide spectrum of society continue to raise concerns that this independence is not being upheld. And then a final point, an important point I would like to make from our long-term observation concerns the media. The ODIHR mission monitored the media coverage of the campaign. In our assessment, the freedom of expression and the media, also protected by the Constitution, is limited by a number of laws. The recent criminalization of dissemination of false information, the fact that websites are frequently blocked and online content removed, and the ongoing arrests and prosecutions of journalists further weaken freedom of expression. Unfortunately, we also noted that the public broadcaster clearly favored the ruling parties and their candidates during the campaign, despite its constitutional obligation to remain impartial. The majority of private national TV channels were monitored as part of our observation, were also clearly biased towards the ruling parties in their coverage. I'd like to make a final point on the election day itself. Voting day was mostly peaceful. Also, there were a number of incidents in and around polling stations. Although the process was generally well organized, observers reported that safeguards such as the sealing of ballot boxes and verifying voter ID were not always implemented. In addition, in some polling stations, the layout did not fully guarantee the secrecy of the vote, and family and group voting were frequent. Unfortunately, over half of the polling stations were not fully accessible for persons with disabilities. These are some of the key points from our observations, which I now have mentioned, that began already in March. However, there are many more points in our report with the initial findings of the International Observer Mission. And I would recommend that you take a copy together with a press release on your way out. And before I finished, a heartfelt thanks to the team working with me here in Ankara, as well as the long and short-term observers spread out across the country. And thank you again for coming, and I as well are ready to answer your questions. Thank you.
And immediately we come to the questions, but after having heard all this, it's my duty and my privilege to thank Ambassador Peterson and his whole team, including all the experts from ODIHR, because we could not do, as parliamentarians, coming in, going out, our job without the professionals who do this observation, issue, methodology, exercise in so many places all over the OSCE area and the Council of Europe area, and therefore thanks to all of them. You will see and read a lot of what they have gathered in terms of extremely important information in the report, which has been recently announced by Ambassador Peterson. So thanks, dear Ambassador, to you, to your team, and to the whole team of ODIHR. Thank you.
Many thanks. There's time now for questions. I would just like to emphasize that while you're all welcome here today, this is a press conference and we will only be taking questions from the media. I'd therefore be grateful if you could begin by introducing yourself and your media outlet before asking your question. We do also have simultaneous translation, and so if you like, you are welcome to put your questions in English or in Turkish. The lady here with the black t-shirt.
Thanks for having us. My name is Katharina Willinger. I'm the correspondent from German television, ARD. My question is, there have been accusations by the main opposition party, CHP, regarding, for example, in the polling stations where Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu was ahead, there have been people from the AK party asking to count again and again. What do you know about this? And secondly, there have been accusations, for example, made by Sinan Oğan, one of the candidates, who's saying when it comes to the votes of the Turkish people living abroad, he has information about manipulation. If you could answer these two questions. Whoever wants one of the answers, I would like to have from Mr. Schwab, if possible. The other question, whoever has information. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, you speak about the vote abroad, although it's not easy for us because we are not really, it's not easy to monitor it, and we have to discuss maybe for the future such rules. But the question of, this is what I mentioned already, that there was a room for rumor, suspicions, unclarification yesterday late evening and in the night, and it has to do and had to do with the question that it was not really transparent what was going on, and I really would welcome in such a situation that the Supreme Electoral Board could clarify how they publish outcomes and how they inform and how they inform about the rules as well. So we hear about such reports. You could read it in social media. We had teams who were witnesses as well, and there were witnesses in some polling stations where there was a question to recount again and again and again, although the outcome was 100% clear. I don't know. My impression is today it's quite clear, but yesterday it was a very not clear situation, and if the outcome maybe would be another one, there were some suspicions for what purpose it was going on. And again, with a kind of more transparency, I think you can prevent such situations. And one of us asked already for a possible second round for more transparency in the Supreme Electoral Board, and I would like to underline and to welcome this as well.
Yeah. If I just could answer anyway, as by way of starting, we have of course observers in many of the polling stations, and even if we can give, even if there are different kind of reports back, I think the important thing is what is a general impression of what has happened, and our general impression is that the voting process was generally well organized and assessed positively. During the vote count, there were procedural errors observed, but I will not go into specific issues. I think that just give you these more general observations, because that is what is the key to it. Yeah.
The vote abroad, I was myself, together with colleagues, at that very place where, in this conference center, giant one, you know it better than I do, where all the votes, the ballots from abroad, are being counted, or have been and are being counted. I was there for several hours. I was watching intensively, and I have to say, also knowing how this question has been handled in the past, sometimes with sometimes no possibility at all to watch the process, neither for the observers, for international ones, nor for political party observers. I clearly have to say that this was a step forward. The allegations, I heard them, but we also heard, and we intensively talked to political party representatives from all parties about their assessment of this process, and overall they have signaled to us that they don't see there a large issue of manipulation. That was the very clear information we had, and they had the possibility also to accompany these ballot boxes when they are coming from abroad. So I see in this part, I see a clear progress in the right direction. Nevertheless, this is a process that still can be improved, but I don't see a lot of room for manipulation there. And honestly, the process of counting there, I saw hundreds of party representatives of different parties, including, of course, CHP and Green Left Party in that center there. So I think that is a step forward. But let's see, this is certainly something which we will also address in further findings. As you know, there are always also final reports after the whole appeals process in an election, and that is something which is certainly never clearly ended in a super perfect way. But again, we see no areas of manipulation in that counting process.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The gentleman at the back.
Thank you, Ergin from German news agency DPA. You also mentioned the relatively low turnout in the quake-hit provinces. Can you please elaborate on that? Do you have any numbers, and what do you think caused this lack of timely transport, or what else are the reasons? Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, we have some numbers, which are, of course, official numbers provided by the authorities, and it shows a few points less actually presence of or turnout by voters in the earthquake-affected areas. And the reason, I think, is obvious. It is the number of the people who left the areas because of the actually impact of earthquake. Even we don't have really very precise numbers, but it is more than millions. On the same time, the people who re-registered themselves in new actually places and were able to vote in other places, it was something more than 300,000. So the remaining people, if they wanted to vote, then they had to go back to their cities and villages. And that's obviously a very huge undertaking for people. And many did that. And that's really very important to emphasize that, because that means how important it is for Turkish people to vote. But unfortunately, many didn't, because it required really a lot of investment. And that's actually the point that we make, and we say there was no legal actually obstacle for them to vote. However, the practicalities were really very huge and required additional investments and time and also emotional burden for them to go back and to vote. And we hope sincerely that if there is a second round of the president election, that there will be better measures to accommodate people so that they can exercise their right to vote.
Could I just take this opportunity to advertise our report, because we have presented you with a 20-page report, and the report contains quite a lot of facts and figures. So if you may have some of the answers in the report. So please also read it after the press conference. It might be useful.
Thank you very much. There was the gentleman over here at the edge.
Good afternoon. My name is Jasper Mortimer. I work for France 24 Television, and I'm a Turkish citizen. In past elections, I haven't seen it in this one, we see very quickly postings on social media of election officials stamping ballot after ballot for the ruling party. In one of these previous elections, the person holding the cell phone camera was a woman, and you heard her saying to the official, "What you're doing is illegal," and the official laughed. Now, this was never followed up. The Supreme Electoral Council appears not to see any obligation to pursue irregularities. It sort of leaves that job to the police, and whether the police do it or not is a matter for the conscientiousness of the local police commander. Anyway, what I'm asking is, do you think the Supreme Electoral Council should have a unit where it does investigate and pursue or engage the police and get them to pursue clear irregularities? Secondly, Ambassador Peterson said that he would have liked to have seen greater transparency by the Supreme Electoral Council. Ambassador, were you implying that when the Supreme Electoral Council holds meetings that members of the press or public should be present? What do you mean by greater transparency on the part of the Council? Thank you.
A couple of things. First of all, that all the decisions are published as obliged to. Then that the decisions are, the reason for the decisions are given. And actually, I don't think it is a bad idea to have open meetings either. And I think it would create a lot of trust if you are open with everything. So that is why I put such an emphasis on the issue of transparency. I think everyone would gain from that. You also asked about the previous elections. Well, I was not observing the last election, so I cannot comment on issues like that. And when it comes to what we think should be done for the future, I think that there are pretty early days to say so. Just to inform you, we have a two-stage approach. First of all, we have these preliminary findings, which actually comes just hours after we have seen that the voting has ended, that we have started to count the votes. And actually, we don't have the officials yet, but we have a report out. But then after this, after the report, this preliminary report has been out, we have a 2 to 3 months period where we really do go more deeply into the issues and come up with recommendations. So in our next report, the final report, you will also have a lot of recommendations on how to improve the process. And I must say so, since I've been a politician for 40 years, I know that it is just now that you have the really big public interest. So perhaps I could advertise our next report in 3 months' time. You will find a lot of interesting stuff in there, I can assure you.
If I may add, actually on the issue of whether the Supreme Election Commission should be the body who actually investigates all possible irregularities, I think this is something that it has to be clarified which part is related to irregularities actually in relation to the election law and the part that they have the authority on that, and which part is a kind of criminal activity, which is of course a normal police work, I would say. But in any case, the important thing is that the follow-up happens and really enough investigations happen. And of course, you can understand that we don't comment on specific video or specific points in social media. But what we heard from interlocutors and from our observation, we know that the fake news and also this very polarized language, inflammatory language, has been part of the problem during the campaigns. So, but this is, I think, something that in Turkish politics really should be a debate on that and a decision how to proceed. On the transparency, I would say we ourselves, we had really a huge interest meeting Supreme Election Commission. We invited also them to actually come and visit us and have a conversation with us and explain us the process, because they are the highest body, execution body, but also judiciary, with judiciary authorities actually in the election process. So a very, very, very important body in this country. Unfortunately, they didn't make themselves available to meet us. Let me be a very neutral in the way that I say.
Thank you very much. Were there any other questions? Lady here.
Thank you so much. My name is Burçin Gerçek. I'm working for AFP News Agency. I would have two questions. I couldn't really understand your answer to my colleague's question on recounting. Do you see the recounting, because the opposition considered the recounting again and again as a way of blocking, as a way of delaying the results? I couldn't really understand if you were considering this as not really having an impact or not. And my second question, Mr. Schwabe said, if I noted well, Turkey has a long way from fair election campaign conditions. Is this also what you would say on overall the election process? Because you said some negative points and positive points, but you didn't say anything on overall the election process. Thank you.
Starting with the last one, no, you know, and our mandate is always to look into the conditions of an electoral procedure and the environment, and to understand the situation in the country. And you know, OSCE have it as well, but the Council of Europe has a lot of different bodies to look into the situation of Turkey. And we don't come just in the country and say a little bit, but we have a lot of reports, and we based on these reports. And you have to look into this situation, and you have to look into the election procedures on the election day. And as we describe it, it was in a way a quite good working election procedure with some problems here and there, but overall, for a country like Turkey, where I would describe the environment for democratic elections as difficult and challenging, it's interesting that it's possible to hold on such an election with such a high turnout and really with the possibility to change something and to vote on something on election day. This is very interesting. But the democratic environment, for sure, it's difficult, and we spoke about it. I don't want to say everything again, and there are some preconditions for democratic elections, and we don't see them really enough in this country. This is what I said about this, or what I mean about this. The question of recounting, you know, you can discuss, because recounting for sure is in the rules. It's in the law. You can ask for recounting, but recounting is in a way, I think the meaning of recounting is the right of, let's say, a minority or wherever to check again if there is a right decision and it's a right counting. But if you have an impression that the purpose is something else, to maybe delay the figures at the evening, then I would say it's not used in the right way. This is what I saw the whole evening. I was looking into myself, into the polling stations. We had colleagues in our team from the Council of Europe who report about this, that for no reason there was counting and counting again. But finally, let's say from the perspective of today, I would say, since all the opposition parties accept the outcome in a way of this election, it's nothing we have to discuss due to this election very much. But for sure, if it comes to a second round, we need a kind of, let's say, clarification how to deal with such a situation. And again, the concerns were a little bit, or had a little bit to do something with what we discussed about the transparency of the election procedure and how the Supreme Electoral Court is working. So I really ask and urge the Supreme Electoral Court to be as transparent as possible, to even prevent, there should not be any suspicion, but they should prevent that it could seen as not impartial enough. And there is just one thing to do so, it's transparency.
Maybe you refer to my answer when you said that it was not quite clear, and to be frank, I really don't blame you for that. While I was answering, I just tried to double check whether we had anything in our report on it, but actually it is not part of our report, something which we have dealt with, so I need simply to study this a little bit more if I should give you a reasonable answer to your question. I hope you understand that there were quite a lot of elements to consider during the very few hours we had at our disposal. But as I said, this has not been reported back to us, and the overall impression is that there were some irregularities, some problems with the counting, but not beyond that.
Thank you very much. There seem to be 3 questions in one row. If we could take from the back and then move forward.
Merhabalar, Ruda Medya Grubu Ankara temsilcisi Şevket Erki. 2 bölümden oluşan bir sorum olacak. Öncelikle şunu sormak istiyorum. Ön raporunuzda iktidar açısından avantaj ve muhalefet açısından dezavantaj oluşturabilecek ve çoğunluğu propaganda sürecine ilişkin tespitleriniz var. Fakat seçim günü tam olarak gözlem heyetinizin ne yaşadığına dair çok fazla elimizde veri yok. Örneğin daha önceden planlayıp fakat giremediğiniz oy verme merkezi var mı? Oy verme sürecini ve sonuçları etkileyebilecek düzeyde bir ihlal tespitiniz var mı? Somut olarak bizimle paylaşabileceğiniz. İkinci bölümde ise şunu sormak istiyorum. İhlaller kolluk kuvvetlerinin ve mülki idarenin sürece katılımı noktasında Türkiye'nin Kürt seçmenin yoğunluklu yaşadığı Doğu ve Güneydoğu bölgesiyle batısını kıyasladığınızda bir farklılık görebiliyor musunuz? Aynı zamanda bu soru şu açıdan da sormak istiyorum. Sizin gözlem heyetleriniz Türkiye'nin batısında rahat çalışabildiği gibi örneğin Diyarbakır'da, Van'da, Hakkari'de ya da başka bir bölgede de aynı rahatlıkta, aynı rutin çalışmayı yürütebiliyor mu? Teşekkür ederim.
I could perhaps do the last question. We have been observing all of the country in an equal manner. I would say that I do not have any material to give you a proper answer of geographical differences. The one important geographic difference we have seen is the one which was dealt with by Mrs. Karimi on the turnout question. But beyond that, I have nothing in my report today on this.
Maybe I should add on the issue of media. In our preliminary findings, you will find 2 pages actually exactly around media. And that is with very exact data, because luckily ODIHR has a very good media monitoring department. They have monitored actually media, and you will read in detail with percentages and with numbers in quantity, and then you will see that there has been you will see there is a clear picture of access when it comes to, on the one side, the ruling parties and incumbent president, and on the other hand, the oppositional parties.
Thank you very much. The gentleman in the T-shirt.
My name is Melis Yıldırım from Ankara News Agency. During this process, did you face any challenges about getting contact with political parties? If so, could you also please share your details?
Well, perhaps I should start on this, because we had, as I said, 6 weeks at our disposal. So we have been in touch with many interlocutors, parties, NGOs, government agencies, media. So we have covered quite a lot. Of course, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to schedule meetings, but when you are in the campaign, we understand that it takes time before we can have our meetings. So I would say that we have had quite a lot of meetings. I think when we got close to election day, we have a pretty good picture of what happened. So we are actually very grateful to all the parties for meeting with us. Some of the really high-level people, we understand that they spent the time campaigning instead of meeting us, but we were meeting with very well-informed aides. So I just record this as one of the positive elements of our 6 weeks up to now.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, please. Go ahead. Just wait for the microphone, please.
Thank you. Gergely Nyilas, Hungary, Telex. Partly you already answered the question, but I still have something about the votes on abroad, because not all the votes have been counted yet, therefore there is no final result. And if I understand, but correct me if I'm wrong, technically it's still possible that thanks to those votes on abroad, Erdogan can reach 50% margin. And in that case, there is no second round. Are you prepared for that scenario? And do you have the possibility to observe the whole process until the final result announced? And will it be a credible result? Thank you.
Ambassador, you can add, please, but I will clearly say some minutes ago, the SEC announced the second round officially with the intermediate results. And of course, but you can say that better, of course, our team stays here. And of course, the job is not done. It continues.
Well, actually, just to echo what Mr. Link said, that of course we are prepared to observe the second round as well. So, and of course, this has been one of the main questions for a long time. So this is actually not a new development. We are flexible.
Yeah, and I can add that it is indeed now announced the result, and also the second round presidential election is set for 28th of May. And OSCE Parliamentary Assembly is prepared to again observe the second round of the presidential elections.
May I just add to say that for sure we are very important as international observation missions, but as you know, we can just be in some parts of the country, and it's very, very, not just to see how high the turnout was in this election, but to see how many young people were prepared to be observers into the country, just to care and to fight and to deal with the democracy in this country, from which party ever. We saw totally different representatives from parties, from the civil society, and finally they are the ones who make sure that the integrity of the election procedures are respected.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't think there are any more questions from the floor, so I'll check to see whether there's anything that's come in over Zoom. I see no questions from Zoom, so if there are no further questions, thank you very much indeed. I would echo the words of my colleagues. The report in both language versions as well as the press release are outside on the table. You can pick them up as you go out, and they are also available on ODIHR's website. Thank you very much for your interest.